If crazy high property taxes have your stomach in knots, let's see if we can help you a little bit here. I'm Rychen Jones, your wealth creating realtor. I'm with Presidio Real Estate GDP Group in Draper, Utah, and we're going to talk today about how to appeal your property tax assessment. There's a couple of things we need to keep in mind at the outset. First, the valuation of your property on your notice of valuation was as of January 1st, not the day you received it, probably towards the end of July. So keep that in mind as we go through this, that it's the value that was determined as of January 1st. Second, the assessor's valuation for your property is assumed to be correct. If you want to challenge that or appeal that, there's a process that we're going to talk about how to do that, but they start with the assumption that the assessor's value is correct. You will be required to show proper evidence and documentation to show that that valuation is incorrect. And keep in mind, again, documentation that you submit has to support a value as of January 1st, not the day that you submit the documentation. Now, markets may have changed a bit from January 1st to July or August or September, whenever you're submitting your appeal, so you need to keep that in mind. It's the value as of January 1st. Here's a good question to start with. Could I have sold my property at the assessed value on January 1st? If the answer is yes, the property was probably assessed correctly. If you feel the answer is no, then it may be appropriate to challenge the value assessment. Now, the timing of your appeal is super important. Notices of valuation are sent beginning the week of July 15th. You probably received it sometime by the end of July. You have until September 15th to submit your appeal. Now, whether or not your appeal has been completed and the decision has been made, your taxes are still due here in Utah on November 30th, regardless of whether the decision has been finalized or not. The mailing goes out beginning July 15th. You have until September 15th to submit your appeal, and taxes are due regardless on November 30th. Now, what evidence are you going to provide? There's a number of different common forms of evidence you can provide. We're going to talk about 4 of them specifically. First, if you've purchased your home recently, meaning in the previous calendar year prior to January 1st, you may be able to show your settlement statement showing the purchase price of that property. You may also want to consider providing the appraisal you had on that property if you had one done. Short sale, foreclosure properties, and other distressed sales may not qualify for an appeal because they may not have reflected the true market value, and they may not be considered as proper evidence. Second is the recent appraisal option. Perhaps you had an appraisal within 6 months to a year prior to January 1st that showed a lower property value. Maybe you were opening up a HELOC or doing a refinance. You've got a recent appraisal prior to January 1st that could be used as evidence as well. Appraisals and or purchases that happened after January 1st might not be considered as proper evidence. The third form of evidence for your appeal might just be a factual error. Maybe they got the square footage wrong. Maybe the address is wrong or the legal description is wrong on your notice of valuation. If there's a factual data point that is wrong and is verifiable, that could be your evidence for appealing or challenging your valuation assessment. Finally, fourth and perhaps the most common form of evidence is the market approach. The market approach uses what's known as a comparative market analysis, ideally put together by a real estate agent, to show similar properties to yours that have sold in that window prior to January 1st. The market approach, though the most common, is often where most homeowners have the most hiccups though as well. When performing a market approach appeal, you're going to want to look at your home as an appraiser looks at your home to determine the valuation. We're going to consider things like location and style and age of the home and amenities, but what order do we prioritize those things in? An appraiser is going to look at what homes sold most recently to the target property, then they're going to look at which are closest in proximity, and then they're going to look at which are most similar. Now, when we talk about similarity in style, we have to be comparing similar style homes to each other. A rambler to a rambler, a two-story to a two-story, a split level to a split level. Your next door neighbor's home may have sold for a certain price, but if it's a different style, that's not going to be a good comparison property for your home. Now, when we talk about location, we can talk about 2 things. We can talk about the market, or we can talk about neighborhood. Your neighborhood consists of homes that if a buyer was looking at your home, would they be looking at homes around your home? Now, that may be a 3-block radius, it may be a 3-mile radius. We have to figure out what is your neighborhood. When we talk about the homes that were sold most recently and talking about a property tax valuation assessment appeal, we're talking about the homes that were sold prior to and closest to January 1st. When we're considering similarities in sizes of home, the main thing we're looking at is what's known as gross living area, or any of the living area above grade or above the ground. Above grade square footage is valued much higher than below grade or basement square footage. We're going to want to compare homes that have similar GLA or similar gross living area to ours or to our target property, because that's going to give us the closest valuation for our property. When we talk about quality and condition, we're talking about updates that have been made, the condition of the property, and oftentimes we're making adjustments up or down based on that. Typically, a more updated home versus a less updated home might have a difference of somewhere between 1 and 5% of the value, but it really depends and is specific to the property. Now, often homeowners add beautiful amenities to their home. Maybe they have a water feature in the backyard, or they added a shop in the garage, or maybe a basement apartment. Some of these amenities have value and some of them don't. Some of them are known as over improvements. If you spend $100,000 on your landscaping and no one else in your neighborhood has similar landscaping, you're not going to get $100,000 of value out of that landscaping that you put in. There's also this idea of diminishing value, where the more of something you have, the less each subsequent one might be worth. To give you an example, you had two homes that were very similar in size and everything else, and one was 4 bedrooms and 1 bathroom, and one was 3 bedrooms and 2 bathrooms. That 4th bedroom probably isn't as valuable as having that 2nd bathroom in the other home. We also need to be careful about double counting. And what I mean by that is, if you're adding value to your basement as finished square footage, you don't also get to count the value of an extra bedroom in that basement. You already provided value by saying it was finished space. We don't get to add the finished space and also value for an additional bedroom. Again, a couple things to keep in mind. The best sales are going to be those that were completed and closed prior to and closest to January 1st. Short sale, foreclosure sales, and other distressed sales may not be considered as proper evidence because they may not reflect the true market value at that time. And sales that were completed after January 1st are beyond the window of when the valuation was completed. Okay, we've received our notice of valuation. We've felt that it was incorrect. We've compiled our evidence that we're going to submit. Now, what does the actual appeals process look like? There's potentially 4 phases to it. I've listed links to some of the most populated counties in Utah below. Each website has their own way of doing it, but generally speaking, you can submit your appeal online, by email, in person, or by mail. Phase 1 is the screening process. The tax department administration is going to screen your evidence to make sure it's all there, to make sure it's sufficient, and to see if there's actually evidence for moving forward in this appeal. If not, they'll reach out to the homeowner, maybe ask some questions, give them a chance to submit more documentation. If the homeowner does not respond to that request, the appeal will be closed out. If the evidence submitted is sufficient, it moves on to phase 2. Phase 2 is the value review. In the value review stage, the assessor reviews the evidence that's been submitted and makes a recommendation whether or not to adjust the value or to finalize it at the previously determined value. The taxpayer receives a copy of the recommendation and can either accept it as the final decision or they can appeal it. In Salt Lake County, it's estimated that 56% of the appeals are solved during phase 2. If the taxpayer rejects the recommendation made by the assessor in phase 2, it then moves on to phase 3, which is the hearing phase. In the hearing phase, the taxpayer makes their case to the hearing officer, and the hearing officer makes a recommendation. Similar to phase 2, the taxpayer is notified of the recommendation, and they have the opportunity to either accept that decision and the decision is finalized, or they can appeal once again, and we can move to phase 4. Salt Lake County estimates that about 39% of the appeals are resolved in phase 3. If a taxpayer rejects the hearing officer's recommendation and moves to phase 4, it then goes to the Utah State Tax Commission. The Utah State Tax Commission will mediate the situation between the taxpayer and the assessor and will make a final decision. Similar to phase 2 and phase 3, the taxpayer can accept the decision made by the Utah State Tax Commission, or if they desire to appeal again, they would appeal it to the 3rd District Court. Salt Lake County estimates about 5% of appeal cases are solved in phase 4. So you've got your notice of assessed value, you've got your evidence that you're going to submit, you know the process now. What are your next steps? First, you're going to want to gather your information. You're going to want to gather your notice of valuation with the parcel ID number, the address, the owner's information and contact information, as well as the evidence that you plan to submit. Keep in mind that if you did not purchase your home within 1 year prior to January 1st or haven't had an appraisal done within about 6 months to a year prior to January 1st, you're going to probably be using the market approach, and you're going to want to work with a real estate agent to make sure that's done correctly. You're going to want to give yourself time to do that because keep in mind, all appeals have to be submitted by September 15th. The second step, once you have all your documentation together, you submit your appeal either online, by email, by regular mail, or in person to your local county assessor's office. If you're in need of a comparative market analysis for your tax appeal, or you're just curious about the value of your home either now or as of January 1st, reach out to me. I'm happy to provide a complimentary comparative market analysis for your benefit. Two final thoughts. Again, start with the question of, could I have sold my property for the assessed value on January 1st? If the answer is yes, there probably isn't a reason to appeal the property value assessment. If the answer is no, you may have a case to be made. Second, keep in mind you're not challenging or appealing the property tax amount that you're going to pay, you're challenging the value assessment. And finally, please keep track of the dates. Notices of valuation will start to be mailed out July 15th. You have until September 15th to submit your appeal. And regardless of whether or not your case has been finalized or not, your taxes are still due on November 30th. I'm Rychen Jones, your wealth creating realtor with Presidio Real Estate, the GDP Group. Thanks for joining me today. Hope this has been helpful.